G'day folks, welcome to this review of Bayonets and Tomahawks. This is a 2020 design by Marc, Rodrigue and published by GMT Games. This is focused on the 7 Years' War in North America, aka the French and Indian War. It pits the British and their colonial allies and Native American allies against the French, their colonial forces, and their Native American allies, more numerous Native American allies. It is a card-driven game featuring point-to-point movement and an innovative battle mechanic. But each of these elements is quite unique and innovative. This is a very fresh, new style of design. So if you like exploring new designs, this is a great one to check out. I say it is card-driven, but it's quite unlike any other card-driven game in that genre. It kind of sits aside from Paths of Glory, Wilderness War is the closest comparison, and those types of games. Instead of having a hand of cards with sort of events and ops to deal with, instead you'll have always one card in reserve, and each turn you'll draw a new card. And you'll get a choice of these two cards to play. What you're looking at on these cards is, well, many of the cards will have an event for a start. It may recruit new forces, eliminate opposing forces. It's a thematic event to change the game state. But mainly, you're looking at the activations you'll get on that card. So in this case, you get a light troop activation, an army activation, and an army/sail activation, and the same over here. I'll cover those in a moment. The bottom little number there, the die value, is the initiative rating. And whoever plays the highest initiative rating gets to choose who goes first. Whoever does go first in a turn can sort of hold one of these activations as a reaction. So they'll go first, they'll activate most of these activations, hold one back as a reaction. Their opponent will go, so the French player will go in this case, and their Native American allies, and then it'll return to the British where they'll get that third and final reaction move to do something. So it's just one small little reaction they can do after that second player. And that's basically a complete turn. Card play, activations, opponent goes, activations, the final reaction, then you go through battle and administration to end out the turn, and you start all over again. So that's the card-driven aspect of the game. You're picking a card to select activations. These vary a little bit. Sometimes you'll get a lot of army activations, sometimes the event will be more powerful, sometimes you get these sail activations, which actually picks up, use your fleets to pick up your armies, move them to the sail box, and then they can relocate somewhere else on the board, and yeah, a form of rapid movement. Most of the time though, you'll be looking at these road and path networks on the map and studying these to explore your avenues for victory. This is ultimately a victory point game. The player at the end of a scenario with the highest victory points wins, and you get victory points from many things throughout the map. You get victory points by having light troops, which include your Native American allies, raiding enemy settlements. You build up raid points based on the size of these settlements. Once you reach a certain limit, 8, you gain a victory point. This track resets and you continue raiding. Once you build up 8 raid points again, you get another victory point. You also gain victory points for control of victory locations based on their size and value. And scenarios may also give you victory points for special things like holding key enemy settlements or forts or things like this. So yeah, you're pursuing victory points, but how you achieve those victory points is quite broad and open. There are many paths to achieve what you need to achieve. And those paths are paths and roads on the map, and you are often spending your time studying these paths and thinking about where you can move. You have several different types of forces in the game. You have your light troops, who include your Native American allies and your sort of colonial light troops. Then you have your larger brigades, which can include your metropolitan brigades, who are your more professional fighting forces, and your colonial brigades, who are raised from local colonial militia. It takes some time to wrap your head around the difference between the various forces in the game. Light troops are effective at raiding and at fighting other light troops. They are not good at pitched battles and trying to seize control of enemy settled areas or fortifications. That's where you need these brigades. Brigades are good at pitched battles. They are armies bringing to the field and fighting a battle, often under the command of leaders who allow you to have re-rolls during the battle. So you'll bring these brigades to settled areas to try to take control of those settled areas. In addition, they will be supported by your artillery and sometimes by your fleets, who will bring extra firepower which you'll need to defeat those enemy fortifications which may be in play and blocking your path. So all these elements have particular uses, which takes a little bit of time to wrap your head around, but create some very fascinating decisions. The brigades generally are stuck to roads and highways, the main paths throughout this northeastern North American area. And so you're studying these paths and thinking about how you can get where you need to get. Your light troops are more flexible. They can follow these roads, highways, or they can follow the paths through forests and more indirect routes to where they need to get, typically to raid. They also have faster movement speed, so they can move 3 spaces compared to the brigades, which are often just moving 2. So as you're looking at your forces and you say, well, I've got my brigades here, they want to capture that settlement, they need to move in this path, but there's an enemy force there, so they might try this instead. I've got my light troops here as well, they could raid here, decoy here. You're thinking about what troops you have there, what they are trying to achieve, what road networks they can use to get there. And of course what your long-term plans are. You'll often be building up a force, or you may be building a road, or you may be getting your fleets in place to pick up these armies and shift them somewhere else to suddenly change your focus and catch your enemy by surprise. All the while looking to secure victory points, looking at how you're going to build up those victory points and kind of win the war on the conflict on this broader scale. There are, the game proceeds via a sort of a fascinating sequence of steps. You've got the early build-up phase where you're really just typically limited in forces, putting them in position, building up your capabilities. Then the fleets arrive with larger forces, ready for campaigning, and then you have the main campaign stage where you have a series of campaign turns. More powerful cards will come into your deck, so you'll be drawing these more powerful events, more powerful activations, and that's when the real war starts. I mentioned you have leaders which facilitate rerolls. I haven't talked about combat yet. So once you have forces engaged in combat, and it may be just light troops versus light troops, it may be metropolitan brigades versus brigades versus brigades, it may be a combination. The way this works is each type of unit will roll dice, and combat uses these very interesting dice, which someone remarked look a lot like the commands and colors dice. They do look like those dice, but they play out quite differently. Typically in combat, each unit is really trying to achieve 2 things. They're trying to hurt opposing units of the same type. So light troops will try to hurt light troops, brigades will try to hurt brigades, and so forth. But they're also trying to advance the battle outcome by providing flags and successes in combat. If they hit enemy forces, that's great. You do damage to your enemy, they take a hit. But you also really want to win the battle, because if you win the battle overall, you force your opponent to retreat. So at first, the dice and the combat system appears confusing until you kind of appreciate the theme that it's trying to communicate. Basically, the light troops only really want to engage in combat with other light troops. The way this works is when they roll, a unit needs to roll their own symbol, and they only score a hit if there's an opposing unit of the same symbol. So basically what this means is that a British colonial light troop attacking will only score a hit if there is an opposing French light troop in that battle. If there are only French brigades, there's going to be no damage inflicted by that light troop. And conversely, it's the same. If the French brigade counterattacks and rolls their unit symbol, they don't score a hit if there's no opposing British brigade. So it's a fascinating way to, I guess, reflect the subtleties of combat. These light troops, these militia, didn't want to engage these big metropolitan brigades. They wanted to engage in sort of light hit and run tactics and engage light troops in combat rather than take on the big, more professional military forces. There is, fascinating series. I mentioned the fleets arrive, reinforcements. There's a very interesting reinforcement phase where you basically place all your potential reinforcement types into a cloth bag and then draw out a number as dictated by the scenario. So the game comes with a series of scenarios which kind of help step up the complexity and introduce some of the core concepts before building up to the full campaign. So you have Vaudreuil's Petite Guerre from 1755, Loudon's Gamble 1757, Amherst's Juggernaut 1758-59, the French and Indian War full campaign, and then the playbook includes some variants on these scenarios to change things up just a little bit. So all told, you have about 7 different, maybe 8 different core scenarios with some variants for optional play in this title, giving you sort of a feel for different aspects of this French and Indian War. The combination of the map, the different types of units, the sequence of play with the build-up, the fleets arrive, the campaign phase, the combat system, the use of forts, bastions, artillery, fleets, light, colonial troops, it all conveys a very strong feel for conflict in this era. And the difficulties of waging war in this environment, in this terrain, you've got so much to consider in terms of your forces and their health and these road networks and what you're striving for versus what your opponent is striving for. At any given time, you're almost always looking at these road networks to say, well, where can I go? Where are the choke points in effect for these brigades? Where can they potentially raid to? Raids can be intercepted by the placement of friendly forces along their path. You still need to roll to try to get success, but most of the times if you have forces on that path, they'll be successful. So you might be looking to block these as well. You're often always looking ahead and planning ahead. I mentioned that brigades need to stay on these roads, but you can construct additional roads to facilitate the movement of your troops. Or as I said earlier, you can bring your fleets along to quickly relocate them somewhere else. So in summary, the various aspects, the use of sort of a car-driven type of mechanic to drive activations, the events often facilitated by these cards, the beautiful map and the path and road networks, the dynamics of Native American sort of call it diplomacy, allies, and the use of their forces, of raiding, the combat mechanics, all these things come together. It's the blending of all these factors that really convey the feel of this period and make Bayonets and Tomahawks a great simulation game experience of the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. I highly recommend it if you're looking for that experience. If you're looking for something to stand apart from Wilderness War, it's been some time since I've played Wilderness War. I do recall it capturing the feel of this period. Bayonets and Tomahawks is another great addition to a collection to our holdings on the French and Indian War in North America. Check it out if it's of interest. Bayonets and Tomahawks, the French and Indian War by Marc, Rodrigue, published by GMT Games 2020. Thanks everyone.